Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in May. Oh my gosh. So we had oh, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to be doing that while putting on makeup. And these videos tend to run quite long because I have a lot to talk about, and I'm typically not in a rush. Like, I lean into the fact that I'm gonna just ramble on. And so anyways, so if you like that kind of video, if you like this kind of video rather, where a woman is relaxingly chatting about books and her reading life and what she read last month, while also just taking her time, then I would encourage you to subscribe, stick around, and without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. There were so many things going on in May in terms of events. If you're new to the booktube space, or if you're not, this statement rings true. There are a lot of events that happen in May. Throughout the year. They tend to be surrounded by a theme, and I want to participate in everything because I'm a good community member and I enjoy participating in stuff. In May there was just so much. There was so much to go through and to talk about. And I picked books that spoke to me, and they happened to fit into what was going on in May. So I'm going to try and rattle off all of the things that went on. Oh my gosh, get your thoughts together. I'm going to try and quickly rattle off all of the things that went on in May. So there was May of the Moderns, in which we read books written around 1900 to the 1940s, and this was hosted by Margaret Atwood. There was Mental Health May, which was hosted by Kim, Middle of the Book March, and Marilyn Maya Mendoza, and that had to do with reading books to further our understanding about mental health and the stigma of mental health and those suffering with mental health issues. There was, let's see, what other events were there? Oh, Misery May, which I thought was just so wildly successful. It was just so successful. And this was ran by Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot and Gemma at Gemma Books. And this was essentially the Thomas Hardy readathon, but I think what everyone loved was that we had the opportunity to pick up our most miserable books. Like, we were encouraged to read our most miserable books. There was also the Spoonies readathon, which was ran by Emily at Novell Novels. To my knowledge, that was most of what was going on in the community, at least in regards to like the people I tend to run with, the people I communicate with. Also, I wanted to say that the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction announced their winners, around this time. What is it? It was in May, right? And we also have the Women's Prize for Fiction still going on. And so, there's just kind of a lot. There's a lot of reading hullabaloo, there's a lot going on. And it's been just a super exciting month. So, this is what I want to do with this month. I want to talk about all the books I read, which were quite a few. And I want to attempt to star rate them. I'm not somebody that typically star rates my books, and it's not really for any real reason. I don't know. I'm like, the reason why I got a 3 stars, I think star rating came about with Amazon and with Goodreads, like specifically. And I think that, so 5 stars is a fantastic, amazing read, and 1 star is a terrible read, and you use this scale in order to talk about, a book or whatever. And I did it, like my very first wrap-up video ever. I actually star rated my books, and then I just was like, I'd rather just talk about it and not, and then have people sort of decide for themselves whether this book aligns with their taste or not. And of course, if I love a book, it's just, you could see it all over my face and all over my, you know, my body language, my voice. I just love, you know, when I love a book, I fall hard for it. I'm like deeply in love with a book. Often I'll be like, it's the best book I read this year. You know, so that can equate to like being a 5-star read, but I wanted to attempt to do it to try something new, you know? So talking through all the books, rambled on. Boy, that was quite the lengthy introduction, and we're just gonna hopefully just jump right in now, actually, after talking about all the events. Okay, so the first book I have up here is Were the Mulvaneys by Joyce Carol Oates. What is this book about? Well, it's about the Mulvaneys, who are living in, I think, the upper, in the northeast of the U.S., and I don't even know exactly where it is set. Oh, New York. So I was right. In the Northeast. Why am I saying upper Northeast? North means up, like up. Anyways, okay. In the Northeast of the United States, and there is the family, the Mulvaneys. And I guess you would say that they were like this stable family in the community, and that they were of some wealth, and, you know, I would think like sort of, you know, upper middle class, you know, family. And then something happens to the daughter of the family, and it is something that truly like tears the family apart. And you know, it's a long book. It's, you know, it's like this chunky paperback. It's 450 some odd pages. I read this with my friend Anita and my friend Sonja. We, you know, discussed it, and oh gosh, I really disliked this book. I really, really disliked it. Part of it was because it was so slow, and I like slow-paced books. Like, I am a huge fan of slow books. I like taking my time, and I just felt like this dragged. It dragged. I felt like there was also this very, and it was written or published in the 90s, I think, but there was this very like 90s quality to the way that female characters were depicted. I don't know, it felt kind of passé. I just didn't like it. It was just terrible. And so something happens to the daughter, and you could see it coming from a mile away, and it's pretty horrific. And then it just, I felt like, was very stereotypical as to the way that this book played out. The family slowly sort of disintegrates, and you watch that happen. Definitely a miserable book, but also made me miserable. And I just didn't like it. I also thought the female characters were incredibly weak. I would have loved to see a strong female character. And ultimately, it's strange because I didn't think that Joyce Carol Oates was a bad writer. No, not in the least. Actually, I think she was quite a talented writer. I mean, she is a talented writer. I just think that this book was not for me. And considering that this caused quite the ruckus when it came out, in that, like, it was huge, it was so popular. It's like her best book, you know, according to the Joyce Carol Oates canon, for a lot of people. And, you know, and I was just like, what is everyone saying it? I just didn't get it. And you know, it was nice because one of my buddy readers, she, you know, very much agreed with me and was like, I just don't understand. It was just, like, you know, it was kind of at the point of hate reading it near the end, which is just not a good place to be with a book. So because I understood that her writing was not bad, she's not a bad writer. I believe that she has a book out there that's probably fantastic. This, you know, fantastic for me. This was not it, clearly. And so, you know, because of that, it got 2 stars for me. 2 stars. You know, I'm gonna reposition myself and scoot to the side a little bit, because I'm going to, since I have my hands busy, I don't want to hold up the books, but I'm going to talk about the books that I read digitally. And the first one was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I was reading this when I was in the middle of the book when they announced that she was the co-winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, which was really cool. I just felt so cool, you know. Demon Copperhead is about a young man who's nicknamed Demon Copperhead, and his real name is Damien. And he, you know, he's a young man growing up, I believe, in like the 90s, the late 90s, and he is growing up in a small, poor Appalachian town in the U.S. so poor southern town essentially, and in which he is living within the foster care system during some of his childhood. He is very much affected by the drug epidemic that was on the rise during that time. And he is a character. Like, he's a character through and through. It was, to me, oh gosh, somebody's mowing the lawn, so I'm so sorry if things get noisy, but like, this is the time that I have to chat with you all, so I'm going to take full advantage of it. He was so lovable. I wanted to squeeze him. Like, I wanted to, like, give him the biggest hug and just say, come to my house, like, you are safe here. There is something about his character that really resonated with me. He's also, you know, a kid, like that 90s kid that like loved comic books and that he understood these comic references, and, you know, his heroes were that of you know, are within the comic area. I clearly don't know my comic books because I can't name one, you know. So there was like this connection with that, which I have a huge affinity to. I grew up reading, you know, Calvin and Hobbes as a kid, and I was very much like the comic strip, like Sunday comics kind of gal. But it was cool because I was like, you are my people, like, you know, with Demon Copperhead. And it was, you know, it was interesting because it's, in a lot of ways, he reminded me, who he was, reminded me of people that I was adjacent to, that sort of hung in the same kinds of circles that I ran in, kind of, you know, like, I was like, or, you know, that I knew from a distance, but I was like, I can't hang out with you because my parents won't let me, you know? But yeah, just, there was a huge amount of cast of characters. Now, I'm one of those people who I have not read David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead are, well, Barbara Kingsolver is playing on the David Copperfield storyline, the plot line, and apparently, you know, talks or uses the themes that David Copperfield wrote about, i.e. like the way children are treated, but she does it, her version of it for the U.S. But the thing is, I bring up the Charles Dickens thing because I haven't read it, so I don't know how it compares or what it would be like to read Demon Copperhead if you've read David Copperfield. But as somebody who hasn't read David Copperfield and just went into Demon Copperhead with like gusto and vigor, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I just thought it was so great. And here is somebody, I was like, if there's one book I'm not going to read for the Women's Prize, then it's going to definitely be Demon Copperhead. That was my feeling. I was like, I don't like Barbara Kingsolver as a writer, because I read the Poisonwood Bible, and it was, you know, it was good. There were good aspects to it, but for me, not great. It kind of fell apart at the end. The Poisonwood Bible, but Demon Copperhead was good all the way to the end. It was like, it was just, if you were somebody who agreed with me when I reviewed the Poisonwood Bible, my review essentially in a nutshell was the first 3/4 were really strong. She really developed great voices for her characters, but it kind of all became a slog near the end. I would say that Demon Copperhead is the best of what she was doing. She created a character with a really strong voice who had a very interesting perspective on the world, and it doesn't fall apart at the end. It was just like good all the way until the end. It was so great, and I just loved it. I loved it. So I'm gonna stop rambling. I really hope it wins. Having only read 2 books from the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction, I've only read 2 of the books, but of the 2, I'm like, I want Demon Copperhead to win. I just thought it was so good and so touching. So that's it. Oh, and star rating. I would say that it was a 4.5. 4.5 stars. The half because it was really plotty, and I'm not like, there's just something holding me back from giving it a 5 star. Like, I don't know if it will make the top books at the end of my year, and partly because I think what didn't always work for me was the fact that it moved at such a fast clip. But I understand that that's me, like that's a me thing. And I know for most readers, they're going to be thrilled that this book moves so quickly. And I wouldn't say that there were times that I wanted it to slow down. It moved at a fast clip and it worked, but it wasn't necessarily to my taste, essentially. It wasn't to like my favorite, like it wasn't my favorite thing in a book that it moves so quickly, but I understand that this is kind of like a me thing. So yeah, 4.5 stars for Demon Copperhead. Now we're going to move into something that didn't quite get a 4.5. Actually, it got much less. And it is Covenant of Water by, I'm giving away my star ratings at the beginning before I even talk about the book. Okay, so Abraham Verghese, his second novel, Covenant of Water, came out and I read it. Oh, I also read Demon Copperhead with Anita, and I also read Covenant of Water with Anita. And it's so wonderful because Anita and I have very similar takes on books, which is, it's really nice. We were both miserable while we read the miserable book, We Were the Mulvaneys, and then we were both like rooting for Demon Copperhead, and then we both had similar feelings about the Covenant of Water. Covenant of Water is about a small village. It's a multi-generational family saga set in a small village in India, and it is about I would say that the family is cursed because someone in every generation drowns. They die by drowning, and in that, I don't know, about halfway through the book I was like, I really don't care if the family is cursed or not. It has so little to do with what's going on. It was a very uneven read, and I will leave my full thoughts on the book linked in the review that I did down below. I'll leave that link down below. But ultimately, it was a very uneven read because there were parts that leapt off the page, and all of those parts were when we were talking about medicine, and I thought that was so cool. And in some ways I learned something about myself. I love reading about the icky, gross underbelly of medicine. Like, I like reading the descriptions of pustules and I like that, the icky, grimy, strange, like, things that'll make most people go, oh, I'm like, oh yeah, like, gosh, I feel like I'm really revealing something about myself. Anyways, I really love that. I thought it was just so engaging, and it was also very alive. It was so lively whenever Verghese was writing a scene that was set, on the operating table or in a medical setting. It was just so fascinating, which makes sense because his first career was a lecturer. Like, he was a doctor, and I think he taught over medical students. So it makes so much sense that he has these vivid descriptions of the operating room because he's probably been in an operating room. And it was just so, so lovely. But then, there was like these parts where he's developing the characters inside of this small village, this small rural village in India. And those parts, I was like, it was a slog. I don't know. They just didn't have the same life or energy or gripping interest. And I like things that have a lively, or like, I like when the setting becomes a character in a book. That was one of the best things about Rebecca from Daphne du Maurier, by Daphne du Maurier, is just that she made the setting a character. Or, that's one of the best things about Edith Wharton's writing, is that she makes the setting a character. And I felt like he was trying to do that, but didn't quite get there. And so anyways, the whole story was a very uneven rendering. Some of the characters I really, really loved, and I think there were some characters that I was supposed to love that I didn't. And so because of the unevenness, it was a 3-star read for me, like very middling. And then also, just 700 plus pages of this, middling read. It was kind of rough. But I can't say it was a bad read. It just didn't do a ton for me. And then also when I did my review, there was a bunch of you that came out and said that Cutting for Stone actually has a lot more medical commentary going on. And so that actually gave me hope that I think the book that was probably more for me is Cutting for Stone. Or if you loved, which is Abraham Verghese's first book, but if you were somebody who loved Cutting for Stone and you're so excited to jump into this like possible medical thriller in rural India, that's not really what you're going to get. You're going to have long stretches of the book where you're not in a medical setting, and then when you get to the medical setting, it's going to be super satisfying, but then you'll go back to long stretches of, medical arena type writing, which again was just a bit sloggy. So yeah, 3-star read for me. All right, the last book for which I don't have a copy of, but I did read physically. I actually read it over the course of several months, I think, because I read it with my students. I'm a teacher, and the book that we were reading together as a class and that I finished in May was Ellen Raskin's The Westing Game, which is in the long short of it is like Clue, the movie. It's a whodunit, almost like the Clue, the game Clue. I feel like I'm just giving a sort of idle reference. It's a whodunit geared towards middle, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and it's about an eccentric billionaire who dies, and you don't know who's going to inherit the money or who killed him, and he devises a game in which he has, I think, 16 players that if they win the game, they'll be the heir of his fortune. And so, there's there's this huge cast of characters. They're very eccentric, and they have all of their own relationships, and now they're sort of like forced together in this game to play, in which they have to figure out what happened to this eccentric billionaire named Sam Westing, and they have to work together, and so there's quite a bit going on. It was an okay read for me. I think my students actually liked it a bit more than I did. I liked it, but again, we're kind of back to this whole, it was kind of, to me, it was a bit overly complicated, and I don't think all of the pieces work together that well. And I as much as I liked the characterization, which I thought was the best part of the book, I just would have liked something a little more intentional. I would have just rather had read a Kate DiCamillo book, because it's this, Kate DiCamillo, who wrote the Marvelous Adventure of Edward Tulane, Flora and Ulysses. I mean, she's a writer of that sort of middle grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th type books. And what I like about her books is that they're so character driven, and they have such a beautiful theme, and it unwinds in such a beautiful way that it's really easy in a way to sort of see what she's doing, and but it's also done in this very with a deft hand, and in a way that's very much geared towards young people without talking down to them. And I don't think that Ellen Raskin in any way talked down to her students, but to her readers. Calm down, Shelley. It just wasn't one that gripped me. It wasn't a read that I was so invested in. And so, I would sit down with my students and be talking to them about the read, and I could see their excitement, but I wasn't in it with them. And I don't know, maybe it was, I don't know, because I've read books that the students, that I just loved. Like, I loved Hatchet, and I read that with my students, by Gary Paulson. And that one, I was like, even as I was reading it, there would be times where I was like, oh, just, and we're like, he's eating something icky and gross. So I was going to say, maybe it's because I was teaching it, that it was hard for me to get invested in it while I was teaching it. But I think that that's not the case. I just think that the book, The Westing Game, wasn't necessarily for me. All right, we're getting there. Got the headband out. Okay, the next book I read, which was a really short book, I read with the Up to No Good book club. I actually read it in June, but I want to wrap it up now so I can get it back to the library. And I read it with the Up to No Good book club. Yes, did I say everything? I'll leave all the members linked down below. It was Recitif by Toni Morrison. It's one of the only, I think, short stories that Toni Morrison wrote. And it is the story about 2 girls who become friends. One of them is black and the other one is white, but she doesn't tell you that. You just know that she doesn't tell you which one is of which color. And so you're left in the story sort of having to question your own biases. And the story is about these young women who their paths cross at different points during their lives. And I think the whole thing is, you're sort of questioning as to whether, which one is of what coloring, and how that has affected their lives and the way that their lives have played out. And I just thought it was really good. It was a really engaging, really interesting story. Toni Morrison doing what Toni Morrison does best. You know, coming up with creative and thought-provoking material to mull over. And that's exactly what I did. I discussed this most especially with one of the members, Angela, who I just had a really great discussion with her about it, and I wanted to mention that because it was her suggestion, and then her and I had a really lovely discussion about it, and I just really appreciated and enjoyed the discussion. So, oh, and if I were to star rate it, I would say it was like a solid 4. It was good. I'm not a huge fan of short stories, so maybe there's a bit of that, and you know, yeah, it was solidly good, and I don't know if it's going to be, I'm going to have to see. It's always like time will tell whether it's going to end up being one that sort of gets a higher rating, I don't know, because I don't really rate books, but sometimes I'll think back in 6 months about this book and I'm like, oh, I guess it was better than I had even anticipated because I still think about it. So I guess time will kind of tell the story of this story with me, but you know, in my mind it's sort of sitting there at a solid 4. Let's do some mascara. All right, next up, I read a play by Bernard Shaw entitled Saint Joan. Bernard Shaw, I picked this up because Bernard Shaw won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1925, and I was like, I want to know what that's all about. And so I had picked this up because I had read that on the back, but I think that the reason why he won the Nobel Prize for Literature is because of a play called Pygmalion, which is the story of My Fair Lady before it was turned into a movie, My Fair Lady, and it wasn't for St. Joan. I thought this is a satirical play that is critiquing politics and religion, but using the story of Joan of Arc to do so, and it was fine. It was fine. Now that it's over, I don't know if I'll ever think about it again. There was nothing really surprising about it. You know, she was, it's told through the story of as if Joan of Arc was this very eccentric, hearing voices in her head that she is to fight, you know, that she is supposed to be on the battlefield. She wears men's armor, and, you know, it's kind of like, is she actually hearing voices? You know, which you kind of think she's probably not. She's just a little nuts. But yeah, you know, and so I got what it was doing. I just didn't have a lot to say about it. Like it wasn't very thought-provoking. It wasn't really surprising. Very middling read. And so this was, if I were to start rate it, would be a 3-star for me. So it was just sort of did what it was supposed to do. And I moved on with my life without thinking back on it or really doing much else about it. Just kind of move forward. Next up is a book that's hard to talk about. It was strange. And it was Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace. So this tells the story of Grace Marks in the early 19th century, who was employed by someone named, I'm looking at it, Thomas Kinner, and the housekeeper / mistress Nancy Montgomery. And Nancy Montgomery, this is not a spoiler, Nancy Montgomery and Thomas Kinner were killed. And the whole thing is, you know, how was Grace Marks involved? And what part, if she was, what part did she play? And was she conscious while she played the part? If she played any kind of part in it? And so there are all these questions, and I thought what was great about it, well, one, Margaret Atwood's writing is lovely, and my favorite parts were when Grace was narrating her own story. She's a great, like, that voice was perfect. She's a great storyteller, really engaging, and she was really good. Margaret Atwood was really good at presenting these questions and getting you invested in wanting to know what happened, like, what actually happened. And, you know, was Grace conscious if she did certain things, you know, and is that even the truth? Like, what is the truth? And I think at the end of it all, it didn't come together very satisfyingly. And so I don't like endings that are left up to interpretation, like at all. So I was like, I was invested in these questions. I was invested in wanting to know what happened, what actually happened. And she didn't quite give it to you. And so I felt like this was a very unsatisfactory read. It was dissatisfying. It was an actual dissatisfying read for that reason. Because I was like, well, if you're gonna get me invested, why wouldn't you tell me the answer? You know, it's just like, it was like, why are you being a tease? I read this with Sandy's book club, and we had our own little group formed. I mean, Sandy was involved in many ways with many different channels of communication, but I particularly discussed this with Ann Novella Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, and Ann Novella Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, and our friend Sonja. And, you know, so we had a lot of discussions, but yeah, it's, and this is hard. It's like a 3.5. Like she was so good at raising the questions, and the writing was really good at points, and other parts were a bit sloggy, but, you know, it was forgivable because I was in it. And then at the end I was like, well, that's just not fair. That's just not fair. So yeah, if you all have read this, you know, and you have some insight to share with me about Alias Grace, will you let me know? Otherwise, I was just like, it just wasn't for me. I keep tinkering with my makeup. I should just stop. Stop while you're ahead, girl. All right, the next read was Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, which is the story of Ethan Frome. And we are getting it, like, we're following this outsider to this small town that gets a lot of snow. Like, winter is brutal and difficult. And I believe we're kind of in the early 1900s. And so anyways, but, you know, as this outsider, the outsider sees Ethan Frome, who is, had an accident. That's what you find out at the very beginning. And you don't know what this accident is. And slowly the outsider comes to know the story of Ethan Frome. And the story is that he is stuck in a loveless marriage with his wife, Zena, who is a complaining, sick person, like physically ill, who needs a lot of care. And he ends up, sort of, a person comes into his life that gives him a lot of life. And it goes down this trail that I thought it was going to go a certain way. And Edith Wharton was so good at getting me invested into what happened to Ethan Frome and what was his actual story, that by the time I was reading it, I was really invested in what was going to happen. And then what happened, and it shocked me. It was very bleak. It was very, very bleak. And I thought about this for days afterwards. I discussed this and read this with my friend Fraser and with my friend George, who I owe an email to. I'm sorry, George. That's just my common refrain. And it was just so bleak. It was really bleak. And I remember Hannah from Hannah's book saying that she struggled. She read this as like a teenager the night before her college interview, and she came into that college interview and was spouting off about how she didn't like this book, and I could see why. And so it's a hard book to like. Wow, I mean, it was so bleak. And so because of, I mean, it's like, it gets 5 stars in that it was doing what it was doing incredibly well. And it really got me. But in terms of like my own like moral compass and not really liking to read things that are so dark, you know, it's hard. It's like, it was more of like a 4-star read. But again, it's one of those things where I feel like time will tell the tale if it sticks with me for, you know, months and months and months, which it might very well do. You know, maybe it will eventually be like a 5-star read in my heart. But right now it's hard to give it that because it was so dark. It was so dark. Okay, I'm gonna go. I mean, I don't know. Now I'm like, I feel like all those people who really love dark reads and are here for the misery, you're gonna be like, it's not that bad, like if you were to read this. But for me and my sensibilities, it was just, it was rough. Yay! I'm ending with like my top 2 reads of the month. One of which was Josephine Tey's Daughter of Time. I did a whole like reading vlog essentially on this. It's called In the Mind of a Mood Reader, which I will leave linked down below. I had some extra time at the end of the month, and I was like, I really want to read something that's on my to be read list, my TBR. I want to read it quickly. I want to just get her done. And I had a whole bunch of options, and I landed on this because Mark at Book Time with Elvis said he would read it with me, and I was so glad that he was willing to do that. So I read this with Mark, and we discussed it, and it was a lovely discussion, lovely conversations around this book. And essentially you're following an Inspector Alan Grant, who is laid up in a hospital, and in order to keep his mind going, he starts to investigate King Richard III and the boys in the tower, and who Richard III was, and his relationship or dynamic with Henry VII, not Henry Tudor VII. And so it was really interesting. It was like a historical, it was, it's like the nerdiest historical mystery, but told from the perspective of somebody living in like the 50s. So it was so good. It was so interesting. I didn't know much about the two boys in the tower, but what was great about it was that Alan Grant, our main character, didn't know much about the boys in the tower either. And so you're learning along with Alan Grant, which makes you feel like you don't have to know these things. But then there were people like Mark, who was far more of an expert on this topic, and he found Josephine Tey's, argument about what happened and the unfolding of this mystery really engaging as well. Like, we both agreed that it was hard to put it down. And so this is an easy 5-star read for me. It was so good. It was so engaging, so much of my kind of read, and just a fantastic mystery. It's lauded as one of the best mysteries of all time. I don't know if that's true because I'm not much of a mystery reader, but as where I stand, it was fantastic. It was just so good. So yeah, Josephine Tey, Daughter of Time. It was great, just great read. One that I can't quite, it's hard for me to recommend like glowingly to everybody because I think it's a niche thing. I think this is a very polarizing book, and it is Bunny by Mona Awad. Bunny is about a young lady who is in an elite writing program at an exclusive writing program at an elite school. And she wants to get in the in-group, and this is so rip-roaringly funny, but I think it has to be somebody who likes quirky humor, who doesn't mind language, like cussing and weird gory stuff. But everything worked for me. It was like one of those, like, I don't know, off the rails 90s movies, like The Heathers or Cruel Intentions. It was a bit like Cruel Intentions-y, like weird, off the rails, strange, but so funny and so engaging. That's what this is. It was so weird. And the whole thing with Bunny, which I loved, was that it was like the other women in the writing program call each other Bunny. Like, oh, Bunny, and it was just like, I don't know. As I was reading it, it was just so vivid. I wanted to get back to it. I wanted to know what happened, and it goes off the rails. Definitely unhinged woman moment. So if you like that kind of literature, this was just fantastic. It was so good. But again, it's so strange. Like, I can see so many people really, really, really disliking this book because of what it is and what it's doing and the way it's being told. But I would say, like, if you're up for just a bananas cuckoos, off the rails, strange, odd, surrealistic, satirical read that, and you're like up to go down a weird rabbit trail, then this is for you. But again, and this was a 5-star read for me. It was so good. It was so good. I want to read it again. Like, it was just like, I don't know. It was just so strange and so weird. But anyway, so this was just a top read for me. I really loved it. See, it's even hard for me to continue to be like, it was a 5-star read. It was a top read for me. But I just really, really liked it. But yeah, just for the right reader, it's hard for me to recommend to everybody because it's the way it's told, the way things go down. I could just so see this not landing with people. But yeah, now I want to read everything that Mona Awad ever wrote. I thought it was just brilliant. And yeah, actually what popped this on my radar that made me wanted to pick it up was Jess at Stalking Kafka. she mentioned reading it and thinking that it was rip-roaringly funny as well. And so I was like, oh, I own that book and I have some time, and I needed a reprieve from other stuff in my life. I had just recently gotten over being very, very sick. And so it offered the perfect reprieve, the perfect outlet. It was just so good. Okay, I'm gonna stop rambling about this. I really, really, really love this. Yeah, and that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching, and you know, the makeup's done. I'm ready to go out into the world, which is wonderful. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and you know, spending this time with me. Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, that's it. So I will see you all in my next one. Bye.